Some humiliations don't make a sound at first, they echo later, when you realize no one stepped in. The wine hit my dress before I even understood what was happening, a deep red stain spreading across cheap fabric like it was meant to mark me. And then came the laughter, low at first, then louder, sharper, like it had permission to exist, like I had given it permission just by standing there. And I remember thinking how stupid it was that I was more worried about the cost of replacing the dress than the way my hands were shaking. Because rent was due in 4 days and tips had been bad all week, and I couldn't afford another mistake. Not another one. Not here. Not in a place where people wore watches that cost more than my yearly salary. And someone said something about clumsy girls and I felt it land, not on my ears but somewhere deeper, somewhere that had already been bruised by years of trying to belong in rooms that were never meant for me. And I bent down, because what else was I supposed to do? I grabbed a napkin, then another, pressing them against the fabric like I could erase the moment if I moved fast enough, like I could disappear into the floor if I stayed quiet. And the marble beneath my knees was cold, too clean, reflecting back a version of me I didn't recognize, smaller somehow, like I had folded into myself just to survive the next few seconds. And I told myself, don't cry. Not here, not where they can see it. Because once you cry, you lose whatever little control you have left. And control was the only thing I had ever owned, even if it was fragile, even if it cracked under pressure like this. And then I noticed it, not a sound, not a movement, just a shift, like the air had changed direction without warning, conversations dimming without anyone realizing why, laughter cutting off mid-breath. And I didn't look up right away because I was afraid that whatever had changed wasn't for me, never for me, but I felt it, the weight of someone watching, not casually, not with amusement, but with something else, something steady, something that didn't belong in a room like this. And when I finally lifted my head, just slightly, just enough to see past the blur of my own embarrassment, I saw him standing at the far end of the room, not rushing, not reacting like everyone else, just standing there like he had always been there, like he had seen everything from the beginning, his posture calm, his expression unreadable. And for a second, just 1 second, the noise in my head stopped, replaced by a silence that felt heavier than the laughter ever did. And I didn't know why, didn't know who he was, but something in the way he looked at me made it impossible to look away, like the moment wasn't over yet, like it was just beginning. The man who spilled the wine was still talking, still laughing like nothing had changed, like the room still belonged to him. But I could feel it slipping, something invisible tightening around the edges of the moment. And even he seemed to notice it in the way his voice faltered for half a second before he forced it back, louder this time, sharper, trying to reclaim attention that was no longer his. And I stayed where I was, kneeling, my fingers damp from the napkins that had already given up on fixing anything, my heartbeat too loud in my ears, because I did not understand what was happening, only that it had something to do with the man across the room, the one who had not moved until now. And then he did, just one step forward, slow, deliberate, like time adjusted itself to match his pace. And conversations around us did not stop completely, but they changed, softened, like people were suddenly aware of something they could not see. And I watched as a man in a dark suit appeared beside him, speaking quietly, receiving a single nod in return, nothing dramatic, nothing anyone could point to and call a scene. But the effect was immediate, because 2 staff members I had never seen before moved toward our table, their expressions calm but firm, and the man who had been laughing blinked, confused, as if he had missed a cue everyone else understood. And I realized then that whatever power existed in this room, it did not belong to the loudest voice, it belonged to the quietest one. And I felt a strange pull in my chest, not relief, not yet, something closer to disbelief, because no one had ever intervened for me before, not like this, not without asking for something in return. And I told myself not to assume anything, not to hope, because hope had a way of making things hurt more when it was taken away. But I could not stop watching him as he crossed the distance between us, his gaze steady, not hurried, not curious, just certain. And when he was close enough, I realized he was taller than I expected, his presence filling the space without effort, like the room adjusted around him, instead of the other way around. And he did not look at the man who had caused all of this, not at first. His attention landed on me instead, and for a second I forgot how to breathe, because there was nothing careless in the way he saw me. Nothing dismissive. It was direct, focused, like I mattered in that exact moment more than anything else in the room. And it unsettled me more than the humiliation had, because I did not know what to do with it, did not know how to stand under that kind of attention without breaking. And then he spoke, his voice low enough that it did not carry, but it did not need to, because everything else had already gone quiet around us. And he asked, "Are you all right?" Not like a question he expected me to answer, but like a statement he was confirming for himself. And I opened my mouth, tried to say yes out of habit, out of survival. But the word did not come. It stayed somewhere behind my teeth, fragile and unfinished, and I saw something shift in his expression, not anger, not exactly, something colder, more controlled. And only then did he turn his head slightly toward the man who had been laughing. And he did not raise his voice, did not step closer, did not need to, because the moment his eyes settled there, the balance in the room broke completely, and I understood, without anyone explaining it, that whatever happened next would not be loud, but it would be final. The man tried to laugh it off. I saw it in the way his lips pulled too wide, too forced, like he believed confidence could still save him, like volume could undo whatever had just shifted in the room. But it did not land this time, not the same way, because no one joined him, not a single voice, and that silence wrapped around him tighter than anything else could have. And I stayed very still, my hands resting uselessly in my lap now, the damp fabric of my dress clinging cold against my skin, because I did not know where to look, at him, at the floor, or at the man standing in front of me who had somehow become the center of everything without trying. And then I heard it, not loud, not sharp, just a simple instruction spoken over his shoulder: "Step outside." And it was not directed at me, but I felt it anyway, felt the weight of it in the way the two men beside the table moved instantly, calm, precise, no hesitation, and the man who had humiliated me opened his mouth again, ready to argue, ready to reclaim control. But whatever he saw in their expressions made him stop, just for a second, long enough for reality to catch up with him. And I watched as he was guided away, not dragged, not forced, just removed from the moment like he no longer belonged in it. And no one stopped it, no one questioned it, because everyone in that room understood something I was only beginning to grasp: that power did not need to prove itself, it only needed to exist. And when they were gone, when the noise of his voice disappeared completely, the room did not return to normal. It stayed quieter, heavier, like it was waiting for permission to breathe again. And I realized I was still shaking, small tremors in my fingers I could not control. And before I could hide it, before I could pull myself back together the way I always did, something warm settled over my shoulders, and I flinched, just slightly, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. But it was not rough, not unexpected in the way I had learned to expect things. It was careful, deliberate, and I looked up to see that he had taken off his jacket, placing it around me like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I was not a stranger kneeling on the floor in a ruined dress. And for a second I did not know what to do with my hands, whether to hold it closed or push it away, because kindness, real kindness, always felt more dangerous than cruelty. It asked for something deeper in return, something I was not sure I had left. And he crouched then, lowering himself just enough so that he was no longer looking down at me, but meeting my eyes at the same level. And that alone unsettled me more than anything else had, because men like him were not supposed to do that. They were not supposed to make space, and his voice when he spoke again was softer, but no less certain. "Did they touch you?" And I felt the question settle into me, not accusing, not demanding, just steady. And I shook my head before I could think. A small movement, barely there, but it was enough, because something in his expression eased, not completely, not in a way anyone else would notice, but I did, because I was already watching him too closely, trying to understand what this moment meant, why he had chosen to step in when no one else had. And then he stood, offering me his hand without hesitation, like the next step was obvious, like I was meant to take it. And for a second I hesitated, my instincts pulling me in two different directions, one telling me to run, to disappear before this turned into something I could not control, and the other, quieter but stronger, telling me that whatever had just happened was not an accident. And when I finally placed my hand in his, it felt less like a decision and more like the beginning of something I was not ready to Name his hand was warm, steady, nothing like the chaos still echoing in my chest. And for a second I thought about pulling away, about pretending this had all been a misunderstanding I could walk out of. But my fingers tightened instead, almost without my permission, like some part of me had already decided before I could catch up, and he helped me to my feet with a smooth, controlled motion that made it feel effortless, like I had not just been kneeling on cold marble trying to disappear. And I became painfully aware of everything all at once. The way his jacket hung heavy around my shoulders, the faint scent of something expensive and unfamiliar, the dozens of eyes pretending not to watch while watching. Anyway, and I felt exposed in a different way now, not small, not invisible, but seen too clearly, and I did not know which was worse. And I tried to speak, to say thank you, or I am fine, or anything that would make this moment less overwhelming. But the words tangled somewhere between my thoughts and my mouth, and he did not rush me, did not fill the silence the way most people did when they were uncomfortable. He just stood there, patient in a way that did not feel like patience at all, more like certainty, like he already knew how this would unfold. And when he finally spoke, it was not to me at first, but to someone just behind him, a quiet instruction I did not fully catch. And within seconds a manager appeared, his posture rigid, his tone overly careful as he apologized, not to me, but to him, and that told me everything I needed to know about who held the real authority in this place. And I felt a strange shift inside me, something fragile trying to reassemble itself, because, for the first time that night, I was not the lowest person in the room anymore, and that realization scared me more than it comforted me, because I did not understand the rules of this new position, did not know what it meant to be standing beside someone like him instead of beneath everyone else. And then his attention returned to me, fully this time, and it was almost too much, the way his gaze softened just slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to feel it, and he reached up, not touching my skin, but adjusting the edge of his jacket where it had slipped from my shoulder, a small, careful movement that made my breath catch for reasons I could not explain, and he said, "You should not stay here," not as a suggestion, not as a command, but as something in between, something that assumed I would listen, and I hesitated again, because leaving with him, following him out of this room, meant stepping into something unknown, something that did not come with clear boundaries or guarantees, and every instinct I had built over years told me to be careful, to stay where I understood the rules, even if those rules were unfair, even if they hurt. But another part of me, quieter and harder to ignore, reminded me that nothing about tonight had followed any rules I knew, and staying would not make it safer, just smaller. And he extended his hand again, not insisting, just offering, like the choice was still mine even though it did not feel that way anymore. And I looked at him, really looked this time, at the calm in his expression, the control in the way he carried himself, and something in me shifted, not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it, something fragile and dangerous. And before I could overthink it, before fear could catch up and pull me back, I stepped forward, choosing to follow without fully understanding why, only knowing that whatever waited outside that room would be different from anything I had known before. The hallway outside felt colder, quieter, like the noise from the dining room had been sealed behind heavy doors the moment we stepped through, and I became hyper-aware of the sound of my own footsteps, soft against polished floors, slightly uneven because my hands were still shaking and I had not fully caught my breath. And he did not let go of my hand right away, not in a way that felt possessive, but steady, like he understood that if he released it too soon, I might retreat back into myself. And I hated how accurate that felt, how easily he seemed to read something I had spent years trying to hide. And when he finally did let go, it was only after we had stopped near a quiet corner where the lights were softer and the world felt smaller again, more contained, and I pulled his jacket tighter around me without thinking, the fabric heavy and grounding, like it gave me something to hold on to besides my own scattered thoughts. And for a moment neither of us spoke, and I realized he was giving me space, not the kind that distances people, but the kind that lets you breathe without pressure. And it made something in my chest ache in a way I was not prepared for, because I did not remember the last time anyone had offered me silence without expectation, and I finally found my voice, though it came out quieter than I intended. "You did not have to do that." And the words sounded wrong even as I said them, like I was apologizing for something that had not been my fault, and his gaze shifted to me again, sharper this time, not angry, but deliberate, like he was correcting something unseen, and he said, "Yes, I did." Simply, without emphasis, like it was the most obvious truth in the world, and I felt that settle somewhere deep, unsettling and steady all at once. Because no one had ever claimed responsibility for protecting me before, not without conditions attached, not without making me feel like I owed something in return, and I searched his expression for that same expectation, that same hidden cost, but I did not find it. Only that same controlled calm that made everything around him feel quieter than it should be, and it made me uneasy in a different way, because I did not know how to navigate kindness that did not come with a warning label. And I looked down at my dress then, the stain still there, darker now as it dried, a reminder that this night had not been erased, just interrupted, and I let out a breath I had been holding for too long, trying to steady myself, trying to make sense of everything that had shifted so quickly, and he seemed to notice, because his voice softened just slightly when he spoke again. "What is your name?" And I hesitated, not because it was a difficult question, but because saying it felt like crossing another line, like giving him something that belonged to me alone, and I told myself that was irrational, that it was just a name, but still, it mattered, and after a second too long, I answered, "Emily," and the way he said it back, repeating it once, quietly, like he was committing it to memory, sent an unexpected shiver through me. Not fear, not exactly, something more complicated, something that felt like being seen again in a way I could not control, and then he nodded slightly, as if that was all he needed, and said, "Emily, you are not going back in there tonight." And it was not a suggestion, not even a question, it was a decision already made, and I should have argued, should have insisted that I needed the job, that I could not just walk away, but the words did not come, because deep down, I knew he was right, and that frightened me more than anything else, how easily he had stepped into my life and changed the direction of it in a matter of minutes. And as I stood there, wrapped in his jacket, caught between the person I had been an hour ago and the unknown path opening in front of me now, I realized that this night was not something I could simply recover from. It was something that had already begun to rewrite everything I thought I understood about control, about survival, and about the kind of people who choose to step in when everyone else chooses to look away. He said it like a fact, like something that had already been decided long before I stepped into that room. And I felt the weight of those words settle into me, heavier than they should have been, because walking away was not something I knew how to do, not from responsibility, not from survival. And I shook my head slightly, instinct kicking in before logic could catch up. "I have to," I said, my voice steadier now, but still carrying that edge of uncertainty I could not hide. "I need this job." And it sounded small the moment it left my mouth, like I was trying to hold on to something that had already slipped out of my control, and his expression did not change much, but I saw it, that subtle shift in his eyes, not disagreement, not dismissal, something closer to calculation, like he was already adjusting the outcome based on what I had just said, and that unsettled me in a way I could not explain, because people did not usually adapt for me. They expected me to adapt for them. And he took a step closer, not invading, not crowding, just enough to close the distance between us so that I could not pretend this conversation was casual, and his voice lowered slightly, calm but firm. "You do not need anything that requires you to be treated like that." And I felt something tighten in my chest, because I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that it was not that simple, that people like me did not get to choose dignity over survival. We balanced both and hoped we did not fall, but the words stayed trapped behind my ribs, because part of me knew he was not wrong, just disconnected from the reality I lived in. And I looked away for a second, my fingers gripping the edge of his jacket, grounding myself in something tangible, something real, and I said, softer now, "It is not that easy." And when I looked back at him, I expected resistance, expected him to push harder, but instead he studied me for a moment, really studied me, like he was trying to understand something beyond the surface, beyond the obvious, and that made me shift uncomfortably, because being understood felt more dangerous than being judged. And then he nodded once, slowly, like he had reached some conclusion I was not part of, and he said, "You are right." And the agreement surprised me enough that I forgot to brace for what came next. It is not easy, he continued, his tone even, almost thoughtful. But that does not mean it stays that way. And there was something in the way he said it that made my breath catch, not because of the words themselves, but because of the certainty behind them. Like change was not a possibility to him. It was an inevitability, and I realized then that he was not offering comfort. He was stating intention, and that realization sent a ripple of unease through me. Because intention like that did not come without consequences, did not come without shifting things I might not be ready to lose. And I opened my mouth again, searching for something to ground this, to bring it back to something I understood. Why? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it, and for the first time since I had met him, there was a pause, not long, not dramatic, just enough to make it real, and his gaze held mine steadily, unwavering, and when he answered, his voice was quieter than before, but somehow heavier, because I saw it, and that was it. No elaboration, no explanation, just that simple statement that carried more weight than anything else he could have said, and I felt it land inside me, deeper than I expected. Because being seen, truly seen, had always come with consequences in my life, and I did not yet know what those consequences would be this time. Only that they were already unfolding. Whether I was ready or not, that answer should not have been enough. But it settled into me in a way explanations never did. Simple and undeniable. Because he saw it. He saw me at my lowest point and did not look away. And that realization stayed with me longer than the humiliation itself. Louder than the laughter that had started all of this. And I did not know what to do with it. So I did what I always did when things became too real. I tried to regain control. You do not even know me, I said, quieter this time, but steadier, because I needed distance. Needed to remind both of us that whatever this was, it had limits, and he tilted his head slightly, not amused, not dismissive, just considering, like my words were something to be measured rather than challenged, and he said, I know enough. And that should have irritated me. It should have made me push back harder, but it did not, because something in his tone made it clear that he was not guessing, he was observing, and I felt that again, that uncomfortable awareness of being seen too. Clearly, like all the things I tried to hide were somehow visible to him without effort, and I crossed my arms instinctively, more to shield myself than to make a point, the oversized jacket slipping slightly as I did, and I caught it quickly, pulling it closer around me, and he noticed, of course he did, his eyes flicking briefly to the movement before returning to my face. And there was something almost subtle in the way he adjusted his stance, giving me space without stepping away, like he understood boundaries without needing them explained, and that unsettled me more than if he had ignored them entirely, because it meant he was choosing restraint, and restraint required awareness, and awareness meant intention, and I was not sure I was ready to be the focus of that kind of attention, and the silence stretched between us again, but it felt different now, not empty, not uncertain, more like something building, something neither of us was rushing to define, and I realized I was still standing there, still wrapped in his jacket, still outside a life that had felt so fixed just an hour ago, and I felt a sudden urge to move, to break the stillness before it became something I could not step away from, and I took a small step back, just enough to create distance, just enough to remind myself that I still had a choice, and he did not stop me, did not reach out or close the gap. He just watched, calm and steady, and that almost made it harder, because there was no pressure, no force, just the quiet understanding that whatever I chose next would matter, and I swallowed, forcing myself to speak again. I should go, and it sounded more like a question than a decision, and I hated that, hated how uncertain I felt in a moment that should have been simple, because leaving was what I always did. Leaving kept things safe, predictable, manageable. But something in his expression shifted again, just slightly, enough to make me pause, and he said, if you walk out that door right now, nothing changes, and the words landed differently than I expected, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a truth I could not ignore, and I felt it, that quiet weight pressing against everything I thought I knew, because he was right. I could leave, go back to my routine, pretend tonight had not mattered, but it would, it already did, and I would carry it with me whether I wanted to or not. And I looked at him, really looked this time, at the calm certainty in his eyes, at the way he stood like he had already accepted whatever choice I made. and I realized something that both steadied and unsettled me at the same time. That for the first time in a long time, I was standing at a moment where staying might change everything, and leaving would not. His words stayed with me longer than they should have, echoing in the quiet space between us like something I could not outrun, and I realized I was still holding my breath, still waiting for the moment to pass, so I could return to something familiar. But it did not pass. It stretched, settled, became real in a way I could not ignore, and I let out a slow breath, my fingers tightening slightly around the edge of his jacket as if it could anchor me to a decision I was not ready to make. And I glanced toward the exit at the end of the hallway, the glass doors reflecting a version of me that looked smaller than I felt just seconds ago, but stronger than I had been before all of this started. And that contradiction confused me, because I did not know how both could exist at the same time. And I turned back to him, searching his face for something I could hold on to, some sign that this was temporary, that I could step away without consequence. But there was nothing uncertain in his expression, nothing hesitant, just that same quiet certainty that made everything feel inevitable. And it made my chest tighten, because I understood then that this was not about a single moment, not about a spilled drink or a room full of strangers. It was about what came after, about whether I would allow this to be just another story I buried or the beginning of something I faced. And I swallowed, forcing myself to speak. "If I stay," I said slowly, carefully, like each word mattered more than the last. "Then what?" And the question hung there, heavier than anything I had asked before, because it was not just about him. It was about me, about whether I was ready to step into something I did not understand. And he did not answer right away, not because he did not know, but because he was choosing his words. And that alone told me more than any immediate response could have. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, but there was something deeper beneath it, something that felt like a promise rather than an explanation. "Then things change," he said. Simply, like it was not a possibility but a fact, and I felt that settle into me, not gently, but firmly, like it was carving out space for something new whether I was ready or not. And I looked down for a moment, my reflection faint in the polished floor, the jacket still wrapped around me, the stain still visible beneath it, and I realized something that made my breath catch, that for the first time, the stain did not feel like the most important part of this night. It felt like something I was already moving past, and that realization scared me more than anything else, because it meant I was changing too, not just my circumstances, not just my surroundings, but something deeper, something I had always kept guarded. And I lifted my head again, meeting his gaze fully this time. No hesitation, no looking away, and I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The decision had already formed somewhere beneath my fear, beneath my instincts, and I felt it settle into place, quiet but undeniable. And I took a step toward him, not because he asked, not because he expected it, but because for the first time, I wanted to see what would happen if I did not walk away. And the moment I did, something shifted again, not in the room, not around us, but inside me, like a door I had kept closed for too long had finally opened, and I did not know where it would lead. Only that I was no longer standing in the same place I had been before, and neither was he. He did not react the way I expected when I stepped closer. No sudden movement, no shift that demanded attention, just that same quiet stillness that somehow felt more powerful than anything else in the room. And for a moment we stood there, not touching, not speaking, but something had already changed between us, something that could not be undone simply by walking away. And I became aware of everything again in sharper detail. The faint hum of the lights above, the distant murmur of voices from behind closed doors, the way his presence seemed to steady the chaos that had been inside me just minutes ago. And it unsettled me in a way I could not fully explain, because I had spent so long learning how to manage everything on my own that the idea of someone stepping in, not to control me, not to take from me, but simply to stand beside me, felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous in its own way. And I searched his face again, looking for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that would make this easier to understand. But there was none, only that same certainty that had been there from the beginning. And he spoke again, his voice low, measured. "Come with me." Not a command, not quite a request, something in between that left room for choice while making it clear that the path forward was already set. and I hesitated for just a second, not because I did not want to, but because I needed to recognize the moment for what it was, a line I could not uncross. And I thought about the version of myself from earlier that night, the one who had walked into that room focused on tips and timing and staying invisible, and I realized she would have already left by now, already convinced herself that none of this mattered, that it was safer to pretend, but I was not her anymore, not after this, not after being seen and not dismissed. And that realization settled into me with a quiet strength I had not expected, and I nodded once, small but certain, and that was enough, because he turned without hesitation, moving toward the exit with the same controlled ease he had carried all night. And I followed, my steps more steady now, not because I understood where this was leading, but because I had chosen to find out. And as we walked, I noticed the subtle shifts around us again, the way doors opened before we reached them, the way people stepped aside without needing to be asked, and it confirmed what I had already begun to understand, that his world operated on rules I had never been part of, rules that did not need to be explained to be followed, and that should have intimidated me more than it did, but instead, it made me aware of something else, something quieter, that within that world, he had chosen to stop, to notice, to step in for me when he could have just as easily ignored it. And that choice felt more significant than anything else. And when we reached the glass doors at the end of the hallway, he paused just long enough to glance back at me, not checking if I was keeping up, but confirming that I was still choosing this. And I met his gaze without hesitation this time, because I was. And I realized then that whatever waited beyond those doors was not just a change in circumstances. It was a shift in everything I thought I understood about where I belonged. And as he pushed the doors open and the cool night air rushed in, carrying the distant sounds of the city beyond, I stepped forward beside him, no longer trying to shrink, no longer trying to disappear, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something unfamiliar settle into place beneath all the uncertainty. Not safety, not yet, but something just as powerful, the sense that I was no longer facing the world alone, and that whatever came next, it would not be something I simply endured, it would be something I chose to walk into, even if I did not yet know the cost.